Sheriff, are you always thinking of me? Is that why you let the outlaws slip away? The town of Redridge was small, quiet, and dusty, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their paint faded by the harsh sun and cold wind. Horses clopped on the dirt roads, and the occasional wagon rattled past carrying supplies or people from neighboring towns. Life in Redridge moved slowly, almost predictably, and most of the townspeople liked it that way. Sheriff Elias Hopper had lived in Redridge for nearly 10 years. He was tall and strong, with eyes that seemed to notice everything. His face was lined with the kind of weathered wrinkles that spoke of long days under the sun and nights spent staring at the stars, thinking.
He had a quiet voice, but when he spoke, people listened.
Brash. Children would sometimes sneak a peek at him from behind the barrels outside the general store, curious but respectful. Adults treated him with a kind of reserved trust. They knew he took his job seriously, and that no one would cross Redridge without him noticing. Elias had a routine. Every morning he walked through the town, nodding to shopkeepers, tipping his hat to ladies on their way to the market, and checking that the streets were safe. He carried a revolver at his hip, not because he liked the weapon, but because it reminded everyone that law and order mattered here. Despite his authority, he was fair and kind. If a young boy stole an apple out of hunger, Elias might scold him gently and make sure he had food for the day. The townspeople respected him, but they also noticed that something about him had changed recently. He seemed quieter than usual, lost in thought more often, and sometimes when no one was looking, his eyes would linger on the horizon as if he were waiting for something or someone. That someone was Clara James Reths. Clara had arrived in Redridge just a few months ago. She was young, with bright eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that made people feel instantly at ease. She had left the city behind, tired of its noise and confusion, seeking peace in a place like Redridge. She rented a small room above the bakery, and every morning she helped the baker with deliveries and arranging goods. She was observant and gentle, always ready to lend a hand to those who needed it, whether it was a child who had fallen from a wagon or an elderly man struggling to carry firewood. From the very first day, Elias noticed Clara. There was something about the way she moved through the town that seemed to carry light, even in the dusty streets. He found himself thinking of her more often than he cared to admit. Not in a way that distracted him from his duties. He was still vigilant and careful. But in quiet moments he wondered how she was faring, whether she was safe, and whether she felt at home in Redridge. The townspeople began to notice the small changes, too. Elias would linger a moment longer near the bakery just to exchange a few words with Clara. He would pause on the porch of the sheriff's office when he thought he might see her walking past. It was subtle, nothing overt, but people could sense it. Whispered conversations began in the saloon and on the street corners. Some wondered if the sheriff had finally met someone who had captured his attention, while others simply shrugged and went about their business. Despite the calm appearance of Redridge, a shadow had begun to grow at its edges. Reports had come from neighboring towns about a gang of outlaws moving through the countryside. They were clever, fast, and ruthless, and they had already left a trail of stolen goods and frightened townsfolk behind them. The names of their leaders, men with dangerous reputations, were enough to make even the bravest riders uneasy. Yet Redridge had never faced such a threat directly, and while the townspeople hoped the outlaws would pass them by, there was an undercurrent of worry that refused to disappear. Elias knew he had to prepare, but he also knew that acting hastily could cause unnecessary danger. He spent evenings walking along the town's edge, eyes scanning the hills and trails for any sign of movement. Sometimes he would ride out alone, checking the roads and streams where travelers might pass. He carried with him a weight of responsibility, one that seemed heavier because of Clara. He could not explain it clearly even to himself, but he knew he wanted to keep her safe. More than that, he feared that any reckless action might put her directly in harm's way. Clara, for her part, was unaware of the thoughts that preoccupied the sheriff. Breaths. She noticed his glances and his occasional pauses when she spoke, but she interpreted them as the quiet manners of a man who took his job seriously. She liked the sheriff. She admired his dedication and the fairness he showed to everyone. Break. Sometimes when he stopped to chat about the bakery or the town, she would catch a fleeting expression of concern or hesitation in his eyes. She could not place it exactly, but it intrigued her. Redridge, with all its dusty streets and quiet corners, seemed suddenly more alive when she was around him. Life continued its gentle rhythm. Mornings brought the smell of bread baking and the chatter of children heading to school. Afternoons were warm, sometimes with the clatter of hammers as buildings were repaired or painted. Evenings were calm, with families gathering to share meals and talk about their day. But beneath this calm, Elias remained alert. He had ridden the trails more than once, checking for tracks and signs of the outlaws. Each time he returned, he kept his discoveries to himself, not wanting to alarm the town unnecessarily. One late afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the hills, Elias walked past the bakery and found Clara arranging fresh loaves on the shelf. She looked up and smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face.
"Good evening, Sheriff," she said softly. "Evening, Miss James," he replied, tipping his hat.
There was a pause as he considered whether to speak about the rumors of the gang, but he decided against it.
"Everything in town going well?" "Yes, just the usual," she said, glancing at the loaves.
"Though I did hear a story from Mr. Collins about strange tracks near the river. Bration. Nothing serious, I hope?" Elias's eyes flicked toward the hills again, catching the last rays of sunlight. "Nothing that needs worry yet," he said carefully. But inside, he knew that the peaceful town he loved might soon face danger. As they spoke, a breeze carried the distant sound of hooves over the dry dirt roads. Elias tensed, instinctively reaching for the handle of his revolver. Clara noticed his sudden alertness and frowned slightly. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing yet," he said, trying to sound calm, though his mind raced. "Just making sure everything stays safe." The moment stretched in quiet tension, broken only by the soft clatter of bread trays and the wind rustling through the sparse trees along the street. Clara's curiosity grew, but she respected the sheriff's space. She sensed there was more behind his eyes than he let on, a story that remained untold. That evening, as Elias rode back to the sheriff's office, he glanced back at the bakery. Clara waved briefly, unaware of the thoughts racing in his mind. He worried about the outlaws, about the town, and more than he cared to admit, about Clara. He had seen danger before, had faced criminals and thieves who thought only of themselves, but never had someone's safety felt so deeply personal. He spent the night reviewing the town's plans, making mental notes about patrols and watch points. Even as he locked the office door and prepared for a short rest, his mind wandered back to Clara. Burnt. He thought about her smile, her kindness, and the way she made the dusty streets of Redridge feel brighter. It was a feeling he had not allowed himself to indulge in before, but now it lingered like a quiet flame. Soft but persistent. Outside, the town slept under a blanket of stars, unaware of the careful watch kept over them by their sheriff. Redridge was small, peaceful, and safe, for now. But shadows were gathering on the horizon, shadows that would test Elias's courage, his duty, and the quiet bond forming between him and the young woman who had captured his thoughts. Breath. As the night deepened, Elias stared out the window of the sheriff's office, hand resting on the revolver at his side. He knew that when morning came, his choices would matter more than ever. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, thinking of Clara and the strange new sense of hope she had brought to his life. In Redridge, life moved slowly, but change was coming, and with it, a test of courage, trust, and the quiet strength of a man who had learned that sometimes protecting others meant protecting those he loved the most. The following morning, the town of Redridge stirred to life with its usual quiet rhythm. The sun rose slowly over the hills, casting warm golden light on the wooden buildings and the dusty streets. Shopkeepers swept the sidewalks, children laughed as they ran to school, and the scent of fresh bread and roasted coffee drifted through the air. On the surface it was a perfect morning, calm and peaceful. Bray. Sheriff Elias Harper, however, felt a tension beneath the calm. He walked along the main street, eyes sharp, scanning every corner and alleyway, round in despair. He nodded politely to townspeople, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on the rumors that had reached Redridge. The outlaw gang that had been mentioned in neighboring towns could arrive at any time, and he needed to be prepared. His hand rested lightly on the revolver at his hip, a silent reminder that he must always be ready. Clara James stepped out of the bakery with a basket of bread, humming softly as she moved down the street. She noticed the sheriff walking with a seriousness unusual for a quiet morning. "Good morning, Sheriff," she called out cheerfully, her voice carrying across the street.
Elias paused, giving her a small, careful smile. "Good morning, Miss James."
"Busy today?" "Always," she replied, her eyes sparkling. "The town never stops, does it?" He nodded, though his thoughts were already on the outskirts of Redridge. "No, it doesn't. Keep safe out there." Clara smiled, sensing a faint worry in his tone, though she did not press him. She went on her way, delivering bread to the few families who had requested morning orders. She enjoyed the work, but she couldn't shake a small unease that had been growing ever since she had arrived in Redridge. Something in the sheriff's manner suggested that danger was closer than anyone wanted to admit. By mid-morning, news arrived that stirred the town into cautious activity. A rider had been seen near the old river crossing, a place often used by travelers but now rumored to be a meeting point for the outlaws. The man who brought the news was shaking with fear, insisting he had seen the gang riding fast and looking dangerous. The townspeople whispered among themselves, some nervous, some skeptical. Redridge had never faced real danger before, at least not the kind that could reach them without warning. Elias took in the news calmly but with a tightening in his chest. He rode to the outskirts of town, checking the tracks along the river trail. The prints were fresh, and he could tell by the pattern of the hoofbeats that there were at least 6 horses. They moved swiftly and with purpose. He knew that these were not ordinary travelers or hunters. They were outlaws, skilled and organized. Returning to town, Elias quietly prepared for the possibility of confrontation. He called on a few trusted men, loyal townsfolk who had proved reliable in times of trouble. They began fortifying the town's main points, ensuring that windows were secure. Gates could be closed quickly and livestock was moved to safer areas. None of this was done with panic. Elias knew that fear could spread faster than the outlaws themselves, but there was a sense of urgency in the air. Clara noticed the unusual activity and approached the sheriff as he checked the barricades near the general store. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly, concern evident in her voice. Elias hesitated for a moment before answering. For its possibility that the outlaws will pass through or near Redridge. I need to make sure everyone is safe. Clara nodded, trying to hide the unease she felt. She wanted to help, but she understood that her place was to follow instructions and stay out of harm's way. Still, she could not help but notice the tension in Elias's eyes. He was always calm and collected, but now there was a certain heaviness to his movements, a careful calculation behind every step. As afternoon approached, distant hoofbeats echoed across the hills. The townspeople paused in their work, ears straining to catch the sound. A few riders appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as they came closer. It was the outlaw gang, and their presence instantly shifted the town's atmosphere. Children were hurried indoors, shopkeepers closed shutters, and the adults gathered near the center of town, waiting for the sheriff's direction. Elias mounted his horse, scanning the approaching riders. His hand rested lightly on his revolver, ready but not rushing. He wanted to act, but he also knew that rushing without a plan could be dangerous, not just for him, but for the town. The outlaws were unpredictable, and he had to consider every move carefully. When the gang entered the outskirts of Redridge, Elias called out to them, his voice steady and commanding. "You are warned! Stay away from this town, or you will answer to the law!" The outlaws laughed, a rough, mocking sound that echoed through the streets. Breath. They rode closer, testing the sheriff, looking for weaknesses. Elias held his ground, his horse steady beneath him, his eyes watching every movement. Then something unexpected happened. One of the riders slowed, apparently distracted by a commotion at the edge of town, a stray dog barking at the street corner. In that moment, Elias noticed Clara watching from the safety of the bakery doorway. Her eyes were wide, and she instinctively took a step back, her heart racing. Elias's focus shifted for a brief instant. He knew the outlaws were clever, but he also knew that Clara should not be near the street. Despair of his mind. If he rushed in too fast, the outlaws could react unpredictably, and she could be caught in the middle. He called his men back, signaling them to hold position rather than charging recklessly. The outlaws, realizing the sheriff's hesitation, used the opportunity to ride past the center of town, their figures disappearing over the distant hills. The townspeople let out quiet sighs of relief, mixed with murmurs of confusion and frustration. Some questioned why the sheriff had not pursued them, while others simply trusted that he had acted wisely.
Clara hurried to Elias's side once the riders were gone.
"Why didn't you chase them?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Elias looked at her, his eyes serious but gentle. "I could have, but it would have put you and the town at risk. Sometimes the safest choice is not the fastest one." Clara nodded slowly, understanding his meaning but also realizing that the sheriff's mind was filled with concerns far beyond the immediate danger. She felt a strange mix of admiration and warmth toward him, admiration for his skill and courage, and warmth for the care he showed for her, even when it meant making difficult decisions. That evening, the town returned to its quiet routine, but the sense of tension lingered. Children whispered about the outlaws. Shopkeepers spoke in low tones about the possibility of another visit, and the sheriff continued his rounds, more watchful than ever. Clara stayed close to the bakery, delivering goods and checking on neighbors, but she often found herself glancing at the sheriff, wondering about the thoughts behind his eyes. Elias, too, found himself thinking of Clara more than he cared to admit. Her presence was comforting yet distracting, a reminder of why he fought to keep the town safe. He understood that danger would come again, and when it did, he would need to act decisively. But for now, the town remained intact, and that was enough to allow a small moment of quiet reflection. As night fell, Redridge settled under a sky filled with stars. The streets were silent, except for the occasional creak of a wooden sign or the distant bark of a dog.
Elias sat on the porch of the sheriff's office, staring at the horizon where the outlaws had disappeared.
His thoughts were a mixture of strategy and concern, but they always returned to Clara, her safety, her presence, and the small joy she brought to the otherwise tense days of his life. He knew that the outlaws would return one day, and when they did, the choices he made would test not just his courage, but his ability to protect those he cared about. But he also knew that he could not let fear control him entirely. Courage, patience, and careful planning would be his allies, and perhaps in time trust and understanding would help the town survive the challenges to come. For now, Elias allowed himself to enjoy the quiet moment, knowing that life in Redridge was fragile but not hopeless. He understood that every decision mattered, and that protecting the town meant balancing action with caution. Breath, And somewhere in that balance, Clara had become an unspoken part of his thoughts. A reason to be careful, a reason to hope, and a reason to keep fighting for the town he loved. The night deepened, and the wind carried a cool freshness through the streets. Elias finally rose from the porch and returned to the sheriff's office, ready to face whatever the next day might bring. Redbridge was peaceful for now, but the quiet had a tension that hinted at future challenges. And Elias, ever vigilant, knew that the town, the people, and perhaps even his own heart, would be tested in ways he could not yet foresee. The days after the Outlaws' first visit passed quietly in Redbridge, but the tension never fully left the town. Sheriff Elias Harper carried a weight in his mind that no one could see, a mixture of responsibility and something more personal.
He continued his rounds, checking the streets, talking to shopkeepers, and keeping a watchful eye on the hills.
Every time he spotted Clara walking along the streets or delivering bread to a family, he felt a small protective tug in his chest. He tried to hide it behind his calm exterior, but it was impossible not to notice. Clara, meanwhile, had begun to observe the sheriff more closely. She noticed the way he paused at corners, listening for sounds that others might miss. She noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders when he spoke of the town's safety, and she noticed how his eyes seemed to linger on her briefly before returning to the streets. It was strange, she thought, the way he carried himself, not like a man distracted by simple affection, but like someone who had lived through hard choices and had learned caution in ways she could not yet understand. One afternoon, Clara decided to speak to him, hoping to uncover a part of the man behind the badge. She found him at the edge of town, inspecting the tracks along a dry creek bed that led out toward the hills. Breaths, his horse grazed quietly nearby, and his hand rested lightly on the saddle, not on his weapon. "Sheriff!" Clara called softly, stepping closer, careful not to startle him. "May I ask you something?" Elias turned his head, offering her a small, respectful smile. "Of course, Miss James. What is it?" "I was just wondering, why did you let the Outlaws slip away the other day?" Her voice was gentle, not accusing but curious. "I saw how you hesitated." Elias's jaw tightened slightly, and he looked toward the horizon where the hills met the sky. Brish. For a moment he said nothing, as if searching for the right words. "There are times," he finally replied, "when the fastest action isn't always the safest one. Sometimes the consequences of rushing can be worse than letting a moment pass." Clara nodded slowly, sensing that there was more he was not saying. "But were you thinking of someone?" she asked carefully, almost in a whisper. Elias's eyes met hers for the briefest moment, filled with something that Clara could not name, regret, concern, caution, and something softer underneath it all. "Yes," he said quietly. "I was thinking of someone I want to keep safe." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. Breath. She realized then that he had not been reckless or careless. He had been protecting her without saying it aloud. She felt warmth, gratitude, and a strange sense of closeness to the sheriff she had barely known weeks before. "I understand," she said softly. Elias gave her a slight nod, his attention returning to the tracks in the dirt. He did not speak for a while, but Clara stayed nearby, sensing that the silence was part of a story he needed to tell on his own terms. Breath. Slowly, as the wind rustled the leaves in the dry trees, he began to speak.
"Years ago," he started, his voice low and steady, "I lost someone very important to me."
A friend. Someone I trusted. Someone I wanted to protect. We were chasing a group of men, much like the outlaws that came through here, and I made a decision too quickly. I thought I could do everything alone, and because of that, someone got hurt. Clara listened intently, her eyes wide. She had sensed that there was a reason behind his careful nature, but hearing him speak of loss made his caution understandable in a deeper way. "I'm so sorry," she said gently. He shook his head slightly. "It wasn't anyone's fault but mine. But since then I've learned to weigh my choices, to consider not only my duty, but the safety of those around me. And sometimes that means letting opportunity slip by, even if it seems like inaction. Clara felt a mix of emotions, sympathy, respect, and something more tender that she couldn't quite put into words. She realized that the sheriff's hesitation had never been weakness. It had been a careful, quiet strength, shaped by past mistakes and the desire to protect others. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "It helps me understand." Elias gave a small, almost shy smile. Breaths. "It isn't easy to share such things," he admitted. "But you seem to notice more than most. And I trust you won't misunderstand my choices." Clara shook her head. "No, I don't. In fact, I think it shows courage in a different way." For a moment they stood in quiet understanding, two people bound by respect and a growing, unspoken trust. The town behind them moved on, unaware of the depth of conversation taking place at the edge of the streets. Children ran in the distance, shopkeepers called out greetings, and the wind carried the scent of baked bread and fresh earth. But for Elias and Clara, that moment felt suspended, separate from the rest of the world. The next few days were filled with preparation and observation. Elias worked closely with his trusted men, making sure that Redridge would be ready if the outlaws returned. Clara helped where she could, checking supplies, ensuring that families had food and water, and quietly learning the importance of caution and planning in a town that depended on the sheriff's decisions. Through it all, she observed Elias, noticing his careful balance between duty and emotion. He treated every person with fairness, spoke with calm authority, and yet never allowed fear to override his judgment. She saw him watch her from time to time, not in a way that frightened, but in a way that showed care, a care that was subtle but unmistakable. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft orange, Clara found herself walking beside Elias as he checked the barricades near the general store. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, and the distant hills cast long shadows across the streets. "Sheriff," she said hesitantly, "do you ever worry that you care too much?"
He looked at her, brow furrowed in thought.
"Caring is not weakness," he said slowly. "It's what makes people take the right actions, even when it's hard. Sometimes caring too much is the only reason someone survives."
Clara smiled faintly. She understood in a way she hadn't before.
Brave as she realized that the sheriff's caution, his measured actions, and his quiet moments of reflection were all part of a strength that went beyond his role as lawman. It was a strength born of experience, of mistakes, of the desire to protect those he valued most. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound from the hills, a rustle that made Elias pause. He placed a hand lightly on his revolver, not in fear, but in readiness. Clara noticed the change in him, the shift from quiet reflection to careful vigilance. He had learned to balance emotion with duty, and in that balance he had become a man capable of protecting a town and perhaps a heart that had grown quietly attached to another. That evening, as the town settled for the night, Elias walked to the porch at the sheriff's office. He stared at the horizon, thinking about the outlaws, the town, and Clara. He knew that challenges were coming and that decisions would need to be made quickly, but he also knew that his careful consideration, shaped by past loss and present care, would guide him.
Clara, standing in the bakery doorway, caught his gaze for a moment.
She smiled faintly, a silent acknowledgement of understanding and trust. In that glance, they both recognized an unspoken bond, a mixture of respect, care, and something quietly growing that neither needed to name yet. The night deepened, stars twinkling above, and the wind carried a cool, comforting presence through the town. Redridge remained peaceful, but both Elias and Clara understood that peace was fragile. The outlaws would return, and with them new challenges and choices. But in the quiet of that night they had found understanding, a mutual recognition of strength, caution, and care. And sometimes that was enough to prepare for whatever lay ahead. For Elias, thinking of Clara no longer distracted him. It gave him purpose. For Clara, understanding the sheriff's careful nature deepened her admiration and trust. The town of Redridge slept under the watchful eyes of its lawman, unaware of the silent story unfolding between the two at its heart, a story of protection, trust, and the quiet beginnings of something deeper. The days after the sheriff's confession to Clara passed with a strange mixture of calm and tension. Redridge went about its normal routines, but everyone knew that the outlaws could return at any time. Sheriff Elias Harper remained vigilant, walking the streets, checking the outskirts, and quietly instructing his trusted men to be ready for anything. He could not afford to be distracted, yet Clara's presence continued to weigh gently on his mind. Clara, for her part, had become more attentive to the town's subtle changes. She helped neighbors with small tasks, ensured that homes were secure, and quietly observed the sheriff's careful movements. She had begun to understand his hesitation during the outlaw's first visit, and saw that his caution was not indecision but careful thought. Her admiration for him grew each day. She noticed the way he measured every step, every word, and how he always seemed to think 3 steps ahead. One late afternoon the warning came. A messenger rode into town, breathless and anxious, reporting that the outlaw gang had been spotted on the hills outside Redridge, moving faster and in larger numbers than before. The town stiffened at the news. The families pulled children inside. Shutters were closed, and the baker hurried to secure the remaining goods. The air was filled with quiet fear, but also a tense determination. The town had faced danger before, but this time it seemed closer than ever. Elias mounted his horse and gathered his trusted men in the town square. "They are coming," he said calmly. "We must be ready, but we cannot act recklessly. Our priority is to protect the town and the people here." His voice was steady, but those who knew him well could detect the tightness in his jaw, the unspoken worry for everyone, especially Clara. Clara watched him carefully, sensing the storm of emotions behind his calm words. She had seen his bravery before, but now she realized that his courage was not just about facing danger. It was about balancing risk with caution, ensuring that everyone survived, including her. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, shadows stretching across the dusty streets, the sound of distant hoofbeats echoed from the hills. The outlaws had arrived, and this time their intent was clear. They were bold, riding straight toward the town's edge, ready to take what they wanted. Redridge was no longer just a quiet settlement. It had become the target of those who sought to challenge its safety and its people. Elias signaled to his men, positioning them at key points along the main street. He checked every corner, every alley, and every possible route the outlaws could take. He knew that a direct confrontation could be dangerous, and he also knew that the safety of the townspeople depended on strategy, not just force. He paused for a moment, glancing toward the bakery, and caught sight of Clara stepping onto the porch. Her eyes met his briefly, filled with quiet determination, as if silently offering support. "Clara," he called softly, urging her to step back behind the barricades. "Stay here. You must be safe." "I want to help," she replied firmly, though she understood the risk. "I can do something." Elias studied her, his mind racing. He knew she had courage, intelligence, and quick thinking. Perhaps she could help, if only in a way that kept her safe while assisting him. He nodded slowly, realizing that her instincts might make a difference in this confrontation. "Very well," he said cautiously. "Breath. I will need your help, but we must be careful. Follow my instructions exactly." Clara nodded, her heart beating faster. Oh. She felt fear, but also a growing sense of purpose. She could see the determination in Elias's eyes, the careful thought behind every movement, and she understood that this was a test of courage and trust. The outlaws reached the town, their rough voices carrying over the streets. Elias stepped forward, his revolver ready but not raised in aggression. "Redridge is under my protection," he called out firmly. "Bit. You will not harm this town or its people." The gang laughed, but their movements were cautious. They had expected easy prey, but Elias's calm and strategic positioning suggested that Redridge would not be taken lightly. Still, they attempted to push forward, seeking to intimidate the townspeople and gain an advantage. Clara, under the sheriff's guidance, moved quietly through the town, helping to signal safe routes for families and closing gaps in the barricades. She worked swiftly, her mind focused, while Elias directed his men with precision, ensuring that no one was exposed to unnecessary danger. It was a delicate balance of action and caution, of courage and care, and both Clara and the sheriff performed their roles perfectly. At a critical moment, one of the outlaws tried to sneak around the side of the bakery to reach a group of townspeople hiding behind barrels. Clara noticed immediately. Without hesitation, she grabbed a lantern and waved it high, signaling Elias and drawing attention to the man. The outlaw was forced to retreat, surprised by the quick thinking of the young woman. Elias acted quickly, moving to intercept another outlaw attempting to charge the town gate. His horse moved smoothly through the dusty street, his eyes never leaving the men who threatened Redridge. Every step, every command was precise, showing the experience and careful planning that had defined his years as sheriff. The outlaws, realizing that their attempts to intimidate and overwhelm the town were failing, began to retreat around in desperation. Some fled toward the hills, while others scattered along the trails. The town remained intact, its people unharmed, thanks to the coordination between Elias and Clara, and the careful execution of his plan. Once the danger had passed, Elias dismounted and walked through the streets, checking on his men and ensuring that the townspeople were safe. Families emerged from their hiding spots, children ran to hug their parents, and relief spread quietly through Redridge. Though the threat had been real and immediate, the town had survived without injury or loss. Clara approached Elias, her face flushed from the adrenaline and the effort. You did it," she said softly. "You saved everyone." Elias shook his head slightly, a small smile forming. "We did it. Everyone played their part." "You were very brave." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. Desperate task, she realized that her courage, combined with his leadership and careful planning, had made a difference. For the first time, she truly understood the depth of the sheriff's careful nature and the reasons behind his hesitation during the outlaw's first visit. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the town slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The dust settled on the streets, lanterns were lit in homes, and the sounds of families talking and children playing returned. Redridge had faced danger and emerged intact, a testament to careful planning, courage, and trust between its people. Elias stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, looking out at the horizon where the outlaws had disappeared. But he felt a mixture of relief and pride, but also a lingering concern. He knew that this was not the end of the challenges the town would face. There would be other dangers, other tests of courage and decision-making. But for now, he allowed himself a quiet moment, reflecting on the bravery he had witnessed and the trust he had developed with Clara. Clara, standing nearby, caught his gaze. They shared a look that spoke of understanding, respect, and a quiet bond formed in the face of danger. No words were needed. They both knew that the events of the day had changed something fundamental between them. Trust had been tested, courage had been proven, and the quiet beginnings of something deeper had been strengthened. Breath at night, Redridge slept under a sky full of stars. The streets silent, except for the occasional creak of a wooden sign or the distant hoot of an owl. The town had faced a test and survived, guided by careful leadership and quiet courage. Elias Harper remained vigilant, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, while Clara James had discovered her own strength in helping protect the people she had come to care for. In the quiet of the sheriff's office, Elias reflected on the events of the day. He thought of the past, the mistakes that had shaped him, and the lessons that guided his actions. He thought of Clara, her courage and intelligence, and the trust she had placed in him. Breath. And he realized, quietly and without words, that the bond forming between them was a source of strength he had not anticipated, but one that would help him face whatever challenges the future held. The town of Redridge was safe for now, but both Elias and Clara knew that vigilance, courage, and careful thought would always be necessary. Yet in that moment they allowed themselves to feel relief, pride, and a sense of quiet hope. Right. Together they had faced danger and emerged stronger, and in that experience a deeper connection had begun, one built on trust, understanding, and the courage to protect those they cared about most. The next morning, Redridge seemed to breathe easier. The town streets were calm, with sunlight spilling over the wooden buildings and warming the dusty paths. Children ran through the streets laughing and playing, and shopkeepers opened their doors, arranging goods and greeting neighbors. Though the town appeared peaceful, Sheriff Elias Harper remained alert. He walked through the streets, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every alleyway, and every trail leading out toward the hills. He knew that danger could return at any time, but for now the town was safe, and that small relief brought a quiet sense of satisfaction. Clara James, as usual, moved through the town quietly but purposefully. She helped the baker with deliveries, checked on families, and made sure the town remained in order. But unlike previous days, she carried a lightness in her step. The events of the previous evening had revealed much about the sheriff, about his cautious courage, and about the trust he placed in those around him, including her. She felt a connection that went beyond respect or admiration. It was a bond formed in action, forged in the heat of a challenge, and strengthened by shared understanding. Elias noticed her as he walked past the bakery. She glanced up from arranging fresh bread and smiled faintly. The warmth in her expression brought a rare ease to his usually serious demeanor. He tipped his hat slightly, acknowledging her, but did not speak immediately. Words were often unnecessary between them now. They shared a quiet understanding, one that had grown through observation, action, and subtle communication during the recent trials. Bet. Later that day, Elias called a meeting with his trusted men. They gathered in the town square, ready to discuss precautionary measures, patrols, and strategies in case the outlaws returned. Elias spoke calmly, outlining plans and assigning duties. His voice carried authority and confidence, but there was also a gentleness in the way he addressed each man, showing appreciation for their loyalty and effort. Clara, though not part of the meeting, listened from a distance, absorbing the careful planning. She noticed the patience in the sheriff's instructions, the thought he gave to every possibility, and the quiet determination that had guided his decisions during the outlaws' attack. Breath. She understood now that his hesitation had never been weakness. It had been careful consideration shaped by past mistakes and the desire to protect those he cared about. As the meeting ended and men returned to their posts, Elias walked toward the bakery. He found Clara arranging supplies for the evening. "Miss James," he began, his voice softer than usual, "you were brave yesterday. Your quick thinking helped keep the town safe." Clara looked up, surprised and a little embarrassed. "I just tried to do what you asked," she said quietly. "Brett." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "More than that. Beck, you acted with courage, clarity, and presence of mind. That matters more than you know." For a moment they stood in silence, watching the town move around them. Children played, a dog barked in the distance, and the warm afternoon sun bathed Redridge in a comforting glow. Clara felt her heart lift. She had never felt more connected to anyone in her life. Yet there was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet understanding that had grown between her and the sheriff. Elias's voice broke the silence. "I want you to understand something, Clara. My hesitation before, my careful actions. It was because I was thinking of you. Your safety matters to me more than I expected." Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she did not step back. Instead, she met his gaze steadily. I understand now," she said softly. "And I trust you, Sheriff. I know you will do everything to protect the town and the people you care about." He nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief mixed with gratitude. Trust was rare, and hers was not given lightly. It strengthened his resolve and reminded him that his decisions, cautious as they were, had meaning beyond mere duty. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the distant hills, the town of Redridge settled into its peaceful rhythm. Families gathered for supper, children told stories of the day's adventures, and the quiet sounds of life filled the streets. Elias walked the main road once more, ensuring that everything was secure. His eyes swept over the buildings, the homes, and the people he had sworn to protect. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a moment of calm satisfaction. The town was safe, his people were unharmed, and he had not acted recklessly to achieve it. Clara stepped out onto the porch of the bakery carrying a small basket of goods for her neighbors. She paused when she saw Elias walking past, adjusting the brim of his hat as he glanced in her direction. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent exchange both felt the weight of what had passed and the quiet promise of the future. There was no need for words. The understanding between them was enough. Later, as night fell, Elias returned to the sheriff's office. He stood on the porch for a moment, gazing at the stars scattered across the sky. The wind carried a gentle coolness, rustling the leaves of the few trees in the town. The events of recent days played in his mind. The approach of the outlaws, the careful choices he had made, and Clara's unexpected courage. He understood now that protecting others sometimes meant patience, caution, and trust in those around him. Clara, from her room above the bakery, looked out the window at the same stars. She thought of Elias, of the quiet strength he displayed, and of the bond that had grown between them. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about understanding, trust, and care. She felt safe, not only because of his watchful presence, but because she had come to understand the depth of his character. The next morning, Redridge woke once more to calm streets and bright sunlight. Life returned to its gentle rhythm, though now the townspeople carried a subtle sense of respect and gratitude for the sheriff and the young woman who had helped him. The town had faced danger, and though it had passed, the lessons remained. Careful planning, courage in the right moments, and trust in one another were what kept them safe. Elias and Clara continued their routines, yet each felt a quiet shift in the other's presence. Words were no longer necessary to express understanding or trust. Small gestures, a glance, a nod, a brief smile, spoke volumes. They had faced danger together, acted with courage, and discovered the importance of patience and care. In that bond, both found a quiet comfort that had been missing in their lives. Weeks passed, and life in Redridge remained calm. The outlaws did not return, or at least not for a while, and the town gradually regained a sense of normalcy. Yet the connection between Elias and Clara had changed. There was an unspoken respect, a shared understanding of courage and responsibility, and a growing sense of trust that neither could ignore. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and gold, Clara walked beside Elias along the main street, They spoke of ordinary things, supplies, neighbors, the weather. But beneath the conversation lay the deeper understanding that had grown between them. Their bond was no longer defined only by caution or duty, but by mutual respect and quiet admiration. "Sheriff," Clara said softly, pausing to look at him, "I've learned a lot in the past days. About courage, about trust, and about what it means to care for someone." Elias glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What have you learned, Miss James?" "That sometimes caring makes people act in ways others don't understand," she replied quietly. "But it doesn't make them weak, it makes them strong." Elias nodded, feeling a profound sense of relief and hope. He understood now that his careful decisions, his cautious actions, and even his moments of hesitation had not gone unnoticed. Bravery had shown him that trust and courage could work together, and that bonds built in respect and care were stronger than any obstacle.
As they walked through the quiet streets of Redridge, the town seemed brighter, more alive, and full of possibility.
The dust of recent danger had settled, leaving behind lessons, growth, and the quiet beginnings of something more meaningful between two people who had learned to trust each other. Desk. That night, under a sky full of stars, Elias and Clara stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, looking out at the hills and the streets of Redridge, the peace between them. A mutual understanding that the town was safe for now, that trust had been built, and that courage came in many forms, sometimes in action, sometimes in patience, and sometimes in quiet care for another person. Elias finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Clara, I don't know what the future will bring, but I do know that I trust you, and I am grateful for your courage." Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment. "And I trust you, Sheriff." "I am grateful, too, for your guidance, your patience, and your care." For the first time in a long while, the sheriff felt completely at peace. Redridge was safe. The people were unharmed, and the bond he had formed with Clara gave him hope for the future. They had faced danger together, learned from each other, and discovered the quiet strength that comes from trust, understanding, and shared courage. The town of Redridge slept peacefully that night, its streets bathed in soft moonlight. The events of the past weeks had left their mark, but they had also brought growth, respect, and connection. Best, Sheriff Elias Harper and Clara James stood side by side, ready to face whatever might come, but confident that together they could navigate any challenge. And in the quiet under the stars, there was hope for the town, for the people, and for the beginnings of a deeper understanding between two hearts who had learned the value of courage, trust, and care.